I sat down and I watched the first 2 episodes of The House of the Dragon. We need to talk about it. My name is William James, I'm the host of The Board Book Geek, and all of my links are in the description. Let's start the show. What is The House of Dragons? It is a fantasy series and a prequel to the Game of Thrones. It is the second show in the franchise created by George R. R. Martin and Ryan someone for HBO. Both series are based on the Song of Ice and Fire novels. This novel, based on parts of the novel Fire and Blood, and is set roughly 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and 172 years before the birth of a certain well-known Targaryen. Let's all hail the Mad Queen. So, what can I say about this show? I'm not going to give away spoilers because I don't think there is anything needed. You can look up that information yourself. What I will say is, so far, the first 2 episodes are really strong. Like, the characters are nicely developed. You feel like you're stepping into a real world. It's cohesive and it's well done. The production design is spectacular in this. In an age of CGI overload, it's nice seeing something that doesn't look like they've raided the closets of Merlin. You can definitely tell this is set within the world of the Game of Thrones, but it's a slightly different world, 200 years before, so you end up with obviously a slightly different look. It's a little bit more high fantasy in parts, but there are some gorgeous scenery, the costumes are nice, and somehow this show looks far more expensive than the Rings of Power, and I don't know how they did that. But then again, good production people, good costume designers, and people who actually know what they're doing can be a godsend. It's based on the weaker novel, Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin, and I've read that book through, but I never wanted to revisit it, and I may revisit it at some point now with this series, but I don't feel like it's not a book I want to go back to. Do you need knowledge of Game of Thrones to watch this? No. Because the 200 years before, you can go straight into this without having any knowledge of Game of Thrones in the slightest, and because of the world building is done so well, it's handled brilliantly. Now, weak links. I've talked about this in another video. Some of the Targaryen casting is an interesting one, and given certain statements by certain people, I do find that interesting, but I've talked about that in another video, and I'm not going to get it on here. But what I will say is that I did find Matt Smith the weaker link in the show. Like, don't get me wrong, he is not terrible, he's actually very good, but he's working with people who are also very good, and I think he needs to step up his game just a little, because he is weaker. He is the weaker link within this show. It's interesting in that sense, because I think the casting is mostly good. I don't think there's a weak link in amongst the other people, but again, I do feel like some of the choices have been driven by a political or ideological notion rather than actual story notion. Again, controversial statement, but I'm stating my opinion. Now, I want to say this here and now. I have a thing for dragons. I love dragons. I have art books dedicated to dragons, and these are rather beautiful. And the Dragon Riders and all of this, and just kind of going back into a little bit of history, even though it's only 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, seeing this kind of world that we heard of, we heard about, we heard snippets of it. We never got to see it. And now we're seeing it, and it's really cool. I don't like the time jumps within the series, though. There's a time jump from the pilot episode onwards, and also I'm trying to figure out the timeline, because some of the events spoken about in this series kind of contradict the timeline that we've learnt from Game of Thrones, because I have to take the books out of the equation when doing this. So I don't know if that's going to be explained, or it's just going to be well, it was history kind of moment. I think this series has the makings to be something good. Very good. Do I think the first episode was a little bit bland? Yes. Was it terrible? No. Again, that's the thing. It was that first pilot episode wasn't going to blow anyone's minds, but actually it set up something quite good. And I think overall this is a brilliantly strong series. Genuinely, I'm shocked at. I was not expecting this. I also got a little bit of heat for a comment I made that I saw no hype. And I stand by that. I saw no one talking about this series. Anywhere. Social media, nothing. I saw maybe like 2 people, but no one was saying anything particularly good. So I never saw any build up to this. It just kind of happened, which is unusual. And overall, I think this is the better show. and I'm going to say this here and now, this show is 100 times better than The Rings of Power. Just simply in terms of writing, production, dialogue, characterization, and even costumes and special effects look better than The Rings of Power. Which is ironically a shame, because without Tolkien, well, there's no Tolkien in The Rings of Power, but without Tolkien, Game of Thrones wouldn't exist. So that's a whole different discussion of evolution of writing and so on. Overall, I'm giving this series a good 7 out of 10 on the first 2 episodes, which I am surprised about. The second episode is far stronger than episode 1. And again, time jump, and then you end up getting the other characters. You get a little bit more into this world, a new King's Guard. You meet a couple of knights. You meet these characters, and they're introduced in a really good conventional way. No one feels superfluous. No one feels like they're just there for set dressing, which again is refreshing. This also doesn't talk down to its audience, and it knows who its audience are. I do wonder if the neutering of kind of the more violent sexual aspects of Game of Thrones in this will be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing, but again, a whole different video, as in, tonally this is different to Game of Thrones, and like I said at the start of this video, this tonally is more high fantasy with the social-political in there, where Game of Thrones was social-political with elements of fantasy. So the tone is slightly different, and overall, I'm loving it, and I can't wait to watch more. And I'm going to give a shout out to it. I need to Google this, but the people behind on the costumes, I mean, seriously, these are on point. And I'm a costume geek, that's my background. Believe it or not, that's what I studied in college. So it's nice to see lived-in, functional, good costumes on screen. So tell me what you think in the comments below. I know this video was a little bit of ramble, and I will talk to you guys later.